On my channel, you've heard me talk a lot about two different brands of alcohol-based markers. The Copic Sketch, Creme de la Creme Professional Get a Mortgage Out on Your Cat markers, and Ohuhu, one of the knockoffs. I've praised them both in their own way, but today we're finally gonna learn what's the difference? I mean, besides the obvious price difference. And instead of swatching them endlessly for a whole video, I thought I'd test them out the best way possible, which is by actually drawing something with them. I thought the best way to compare them would be to draw something and then color that same something twice, once with the Copic and once with the Ohuhu. So here I am just drawing out something. I draw a lot of people, so I definitely wanted to draw a person in this comparison video so that you can kind of see how the different colors will work together and if they're patchy or not for, you know, skin purposes, because I like to have a nice smooth even coat for skin. And because I think a lot of you guys as well draw people, so you're not going to want to see me draw two buildings and see which of the markers colors a better building when you're going to be drawing people in your own time. So I definitely wanted to draw a person, so that's what I'm doing today. And I've seen on Pinterest a bunch of these women with these beautiful scarves in their hair, so I was very inspired by that, and so that is why there's not a lot of hair here, and I usually draw a lot of hair, so if you want to see how these markers work with hair, you can probably watch literally any other video that I've done, but today's not going to be that day. I wanted to use a lot more, I wanted to use a variation of colors in this, and by adding a scarf in where like hair would be, I'm able to use a bit more of a saturated, crazy color that I might not have been able to do if I had done hair, unless I wanted to do dyed hair, which is obviously always an option, but it's not what I did today. And once I had drawn the scarf, all I really wanted to do was draw like these big poofy folds, so I gave her this like over-the-shoulder shawl, and then that made me start thinking maybe someone who possessed some kind of magic, like a fortune teller or a witch or something, and then I gave her this like fringe at the bottom of the shawl, and I was really, really happy with it. So I inked it, and then I scanned it into the computer, printed it out twice, and it was time to color it. Roll split screen. So on the left, I will be using Copic markers, and on the right, I'll be using my Ohuhu markers. I started off with the skin. It's just what I always do. I don't know why. I think maybe because the face is made up of skin, and if you mess up the face, you kind of mess up the whole drawing. So I like to start with that. A very important note I should mention for comparison purposes is that I colored the Copic one first. So I picked out all my colors that way. I chose what Copic colors I had and worked from there because I have less Copic markers than I have Ohuhu. I have about 70 Copic markers, I think, and then with Ohuhu I have 100 packs, so there's a few more color options there. So I thought I better start with the Copic colors, that way I can just match them with the Ohuhu. So I think it's very important to know that the Copic is kind of the colors that I was choosing and the ones that I really wanted to go with this particular illustration, whereas on the right with the Ohuhu markers, that's me trying my best to imitate the colors that I owned of Copic markers. So you'll notice like with Ohuhu they're a lot more saturated, whereas on the left with the Copic markers they're less saturated. And I own every single Ohuhu marker and there isn't one that matches that Copic marker. I don't own every Copic marker, so there is a possibility that there's a Copic marker that matches this Ohuhu marker, but I don't own that one. So I think that's just important for me to mention that I chose the colors on the left first, and then on the right I'm trying to match those colors. So if you're looking at markers and you prefer the colors on the left, Copic is probably a better option for you to invest in, whereas if you're cool with the colors on the right, then Ohuhu are still a very good option as well. So I did make a pretty big goof that I need to mention because it's going to be kind of obvious in the appearance of this illustration for a little bit. This is the Copic marker one. I used a mix of the color E15 and E18 and blended them out so I could get a nice mid-tone between those two colors for the skin. And unfortunately, I mentioned this like a while ago when I did my bullet journal video, and it specifically said that I needed to refill my E15 and purchase a refill, but I guess I just spewed it out of my mouth and didn't make any sort of mental note of it at all. So when it came to drawing this, it was a little low, and that is why it looks so patchy. Near the end of this illustration, I go over the entire skin with another base tone and try to like blend out the colors to remove that patchiness, but I needed to mention it because it's gonna look patchy for a little while, and that's not really a representation of the Copic markers, it's just an empty marker. So yeah, anyway, back to the comparison. As the picture progresses, I'll be showing you more differences with color, but I should also mention the cosmetic differences between these two markers. So the Copic sketch marker, the one on the left, has a brush nib on one end and a chisel nib on the other. The color name is labeled on both caps and the barrel. And then on the Ohuhu markers, the ones on the right, it is a white, it's a little bit more round of a marker so it can roll away a little easier. It has the colors only labeled on the two ends, so the caps. Color of the marker is not labeled on the barrel, so make sure you put the caps on the right ones. I've messed that up a few times. And of course, Ohuhu is currently only sold as a bullet nib and a chisel nib, so you don't get that wonderful soft brush nib that helps you blend out colors easier and give you those nice soft gradients that a Copic sketch marker would. Moving on to the red color of the drawing, I was able to find a pretty good match to the Copic with the Ohuhu, so I used those on both of the illustrations and colored in the entire shawl section of the drawing. These markers were both markers that I hadn't used very much, so you'll notice the difference with patchiness compared to like the skin. It's a much more even coat, so the more you use the marker, the drier it's going to be and the more patchy things are going to be, which is why you're going to need to buy refills. And when it comes to refills, Ohuhu does not sell refills, so that's not even an option. If a marker goes dead, you'd have to buy a whole new pack. With Copic markers, they sell refills for I think about $8. I saw on DickBlick for like $5, I think, and you can refill that marker like 8 to 10 times, it says. I just bought my first refills and they're coming in the mail, especially E15. So I'm excited to refill marker and see how well it works when it's like brand spanking new, because I purchased my Copic markers secondhand because they are so expensive. So a lot of my markers have received a lot of love and need a little bit more attention to get back into their prime. Whereas with the Ohuhu, I'm actually using a brand new set for this drawing, so those are all brand new markers. Sometimes Ohuhu does send a marker and they're a bit on the dry side, like I don't know if they're just old or something. They're a bit hit or miss, but that kind of comes with the territory of paying like 1/10 the price. If you're watching this video to hear me tell you which ones to buy, I'm not going to do that. I'm trying to do a very even comparison so that you as the viewer can make your own assertions and decisions and figure out which of these is best for you. Because depending on what stage of life you're at or your involvement in art, the one that's best for you might be different. So I just wanted to lay this out here and give everyone the information they need to make their own decision. I will go over my final thoughts at the end though. If you're new to alcohol-based markers, one of the coolest things about them is the way that you can layer them. So you'll notice I'm actually shading the red part of the shawl with the same blue color that I'm using to color in her scarf that's in her hair. So it's really cool the way they layer and you can see them blend, so it creates this almost gray color by layering the blue on top of the red, and I did that on both of the Ohuhu and the Copic one. An interesting thing I noticed after doing these drawings back to back is that when it came to the Copic marker, I used just the brush nib and almost never switched to the chisel, except when it came to E15 and I was running out of ink and I was just switching to hopefully find some ink in there. Whereas with the Ohuhu marker, I was constantly switching between the bullet nib and the chisel nib depending on what size of area I'm trying to fill in, or if I'm trying to make those detailed shading, cell shading sections, or trying to create little sections of color. I needed the bullet nib, and if I wanted to fill in larger sections, I was switching to the chisel nib. And I also noticed, which I've mentioned in a previous video, that the bullet nib tends to be on the drier side and the chisel nib tends to have a lot more ink. So if I want to like blend things out, I'm switching to the chisel nib even if it's a smaller section of the drawing. And if I'm adding in tiny blocks of color that I don't want to blend too much, I can use the bullet nib, and I can even blend with the bullet nib if I don't want it to blend out quite as smoothly as it would with the chisel nib. That might not make a whole lot of sense, but if you've ever used markers and you've blended these things out, I think it does. The difference is that with Copic markers, I was basically just using the brush nib the entire time. So I was using it to block down colors, and I was also using it to blend out these colors. And it might have saved like a tiny bit of time between switching between the one nib and the other, but it really wasn't a significant difference. I think I filled in sections a lot faster just because I was using a brush nib, which is a lot wider than the bullet nib is with the Ohuhu. This doesn't really have anything to do with comparing the two markers, but it's a tip that, like, once I learned it, like, absolutely saved my life. So thank you, Renee Violet. I'll have a link in the description. She told me about this. So if you want to color something and you don't want it to look yellow or orange, you want it to look gold, try and shade it with the color green. Oh my gosh, look at the difference that makes. Instead of her just having like bright yellow jewelry, now it has that sort of gold shine to it. Isn't that pretty cool? Anyway, I think it's cool. Now I'm finally fixing the skin on the Copic one, going over the entire thing with another color. I don't remember which one this was. It was probably like E16 or something. And I'm just creating a soft layer over the whole thing to basically fill in any of the patches of white that were still showing through that I didn't want to be there. There are some sections that I kind of messed up earlier because I used basically the shading color on like the tips of her fingers, and I got a little too dark there. And especially with beginners, I think the darker colors can be a little scary because you can't, you know, you can only lift so much Copic, and I tried my best and I really wasn't able to lift any more than that, so I have a little bit of those patchy mistakes. But going over the entire skin with just another marker that actually had ink in it really helped even out the skin tone, and I like it a lot better now. I think that was the biggest, like, major mistake that was on my part instead of just the markers, and I wanted to point that out because like if not, you might like look at the two and like say, oh well, I think the Ohuhu just looks cleaner, so I'm gonna buy Ohuhu. And honestly, I think I just did a better job shading the face on the Ohuhu one, so the one on the right. I think I put like the shadows in the right spots, whereas with the Copic one, I went a little too crazy in the center of her face with the shading. But that probably comes down to the fact that I wasn't able to draw these at the exact same time, so I learned stuff that when I was drawing the Copic one that I applied to the one with the Ohuhu markers, which, I mean, that there's a lesson in there somewhere. Like, look at the progress I made from left to right. Like, that seems pretty good, don't you think? Like, my improvement of drawing the exact same picture the second time. See, there's always a bright side. Then with that, it was just coming down to adding in the final little details. Since this was printed out, because I scanned it in and then printed out the line art so that I would have two identical line arts, the colors were a little bit off, like they weren't a very solid black line art, so I went over like the eyes, which I like to be big and bold, so I went over that with a fine liner on both of the drawings and added some like eyelashes and things like that. Just kind of like added a little bit more pizzazz. I also used a white gel pen, in this case the Sakura Decoress pen, and added little highlights here and there to add a little pop and little fresh boops of white. I don't know. I just remember this was like a thing that like every artist did on DeviantArt back in the day, and I still haven't given it up. Maybe I need to grow up and stop doing it, but it's fun. I just like going bloop with the little white gel pen. It's just, I don't know, it's one of my favorite things. So, one day I'll stop, but not today. Oh my gosh, I totally forgot that I did this, but I used the white gel pen after doing the little highlights on the skin. I used it to add details to both the shawl and her veil scarf thing. So I added polka dots to her shawl, and I don't know what to call it, and I added stripes to her scarf, and I really like the way and the texture that adds, and I think the drawing just has a lot more character to it when you add some kind of texture. It's not just those flat colors, there's a little something extra, and I'm really happy with that, and I love adding patterns, especially simple ones that don't take too much brain power, you know? So these are the two finished drawings for the Copic on the left and the Ohuhu on the right. I think the biggest difference comes down to whether or not you're willing to take the little extra time to blend out the colors with Ohuhu and switching to the chisel nib, and I don't know, it takes a little bit more extra effort to blend and create smooth gradients, whereas with the Copic markers you just use that brush nib all the time and like everything just blends pretty smoothly unless you're trying to not make it blend smoothly. And then the color options. So with Ohuhu, you're limited to the colors that they have, and with Copic, there's a lot of colors. I don't really know how many. I'm gonna guess that there's over, I don't know, 400 colors maybe, but there's a lot of colors to pick, and it can be a little overwhelming picking your colors. So that's another cool thing about Ohuhu, that it's just a mix of colors. You pick it up, and that's what you got, and you got to work with it. I actually filmed this video once before this one, and you can see the results that I had, and I thought I just didn't do a good job picking the colors with the Ohuhu, because for the longest time I was just trying to copy the colors that I had picked with the Copic, and I just wasn't able to find the ones that were very similar with the Ohuhu, so my first attempt didn't turn out as well, which is why I gave it another go. And I decided to do them both over again just because I really wanted to redo the Copic one as well, and I wasn't happy with it. So these are the two second ones. I think it's pretty important to show both of them just so that you can see the differences that you can get with the exact same markers, and like what happens when your marker's not dried out and what happens when you pick the wrong colors. So like those are the two Ohuhu ones and those are the two Copic marker ones. And I think the most frustrating thing with the Ohuhu markers is that I wasn't able to find a color that closely matched the Copic marker that I used for the skin tone. And you'll see with the Ohuhu, those two skin tones are very different from each other, but those were the two closest colors I could find that were similar to the one that I used for the Copic marker, and you can see how different on which side of the spectrum these two are, and it's kind of annoying that I wasn't able to find the color that I was looking for. So yeah, color choices is definitely the biggest setback with Ohuhu markers. While I love my Copic markers, I'm really thankful that there's an option like Ohuhu out there that you can make very similar results for 1/10 of the price. And maybe it's not as convenient, but that price is pretty darn convenient, so I think we can all make pretty good exceptions for that. I'm gonna stand by what I've said in most of my Ohuhu review, and that is that Ohuhu is just a really good stepping stone to see if alcohol-based markers are something that you want to pursue. And at the price that they come in, like, it's really not, you can't really mess up, I don't think. And if you learn that you love them, then you can start slowly investing in the colors that you use the most with Copic markers. And I think that's what I'm gonna stand by. It's pretty much, it's a right down the middle answer, I suppose. It's not gonna pick which one's the best, but I think that they each have their benefits, and I've said that through the whole video. Since I went through all the trouble to scan in the line art for this, I'm gonna have it available for you to color if you'd like to. I'll have it linked in the description, and you can check it out for yourself and color it with whatever colors you want. Maybe you want her to wear bright pink. That's up to you. You can do whatever you want. And yeah, I want to just thank you guys for watching, and I hope you all have a delicious evening full of waffles. Bye.